There's been some polling that's been published in the last 24 hours, which suggests that Sir Keir Starmer, who is enjoying a very brief honeymoon after winning the election, he's now down into negative approval ratings.
Up to the minute political analysis from the Sunday Times is Deputy Political Editor Harry York. Good morning, Harry.
Good morning.
I suppose we better start with the riots. I mean, what is your sense of things? It feels like they've calmed down, but I don't want to tempt fate. Is it your sense that kind of we're over the worst?
Well, I think that is also Sir Keir Starmer's view that we don't want to get too complacent at this moment in time. As of this morning, as you say, we've seen things start to come down. On Wednesday, the mass protests that were feared didn't materialise, but the reason why the Prime Minister is still wary and is guarding against complacency is for a number of reasons. The first is that we have a number of demonstrations potentially taking place later this afternoon in a few areas. There's certainly one planned for Newcastle. And there's also potentially flashpoints in places like Stoke and Shrewsbury. But the second one, and this is the concern for ministers, and this is something that's been discussed behind the scenes in government for the last few days, is that it's the return of the football season this weekend. So we have the Charity Shield game at Wembley this afternoon, but we also have a number of English Championship games kicking off. Now, the concern both for the police and ministers is that Sir Keir Starmer's view, and he's articulated this publicly, is that a lot of this is far-right thuggery, and actually he has made the link privately to hooliganism. And that's the concern, is that some of these football matches, you could see football hooligans turning up, and you could start to see some of what we've seen in the last fortnight play out at the football. So what you can expect to see today is a very large police presence across the country at some of these games. I think in total we've got 6,000 police officers on standby, and there's 100 additional prosecutors ready to go. But the police, certainly the view of senior police leaders, is that if they can get through this weekend without any further flare-ups, then their hope is that they can start to unwind some of the resource that they've been deploying in the last 2 weeks. And their hope long-term is that that might actually see things come to an end.
Politically, how do you think he comes out of it, Keir Starmer? Because there's an interesting piece in the Times today by Ollie Wright and Steve Swinford saying that his response to it was very much informed by his time as Director of Public Prosecutions and how they dealt with the riots back in 2011. And he quickly thought, look, the key to this is getting prosecutions done swiftly. And in fairness, that seems to have worked in the sense that when we had the first people being sentenced earlier this week, the riots then started to die down. Do you think he comes out of it politically stronger, or do you think just the nature of what's happened over the past fortnight means inevitably he will be weakened to some extent?
Well, I think you're right. He's certainly adopted the same playbook that helped him through 2011. You've seen that rapid sentencing. You've seen the court hearings played out on national television as a deterrent. And that's worked to help kind of restore order, I think. Look, there's been some polling that's been published in the last 24 hours, which suggests that Sir Keir Starmer, who is enjoying a very brief honeymoon after winning the election, he's now down into negative approval ratings. Now, that's obviously not great for a leader that's just won a huge majority, but just for some context, from memory, I'm pretty sure that most of the Conservative prime ministers we've had in the last 10 years or so, they also entered office with negative ratings. I think the only difference was maybe Theresa May, actually. So to be honest, I don't think that people around Sir Keir, and I don't think the Prime Minister himself will be too worried about that, because I think they broadly feel that they've handled this crisis pretty well. This crisis has actually, in some ways, demonstrated the strengths that Sir Keir Starmer has. He's not, hot on rhetoric. He's not necessarily a really top-notch public speaker, but what he is an organisational thinker, and he knows the justice system like the back of his hand, and that's kind of been demonstrated over the last few days in how they've kind of pulled together the response to the riot. So I think they think they've had a good crisis actually on this.
We're going to talk about Elon Musk a bit later on with the Times' Africa correspondent Jane Flanagan, who's been interviewing Elon Musk's father, Errol. Elon Musk, of course, has been in the news a lot this week because of what he's had to say about the riots in the UK, saying that we're on the verge of a civil war, accusing Keir Starmer of being two-tier Keir and reviving this theory about two-tier policing. How will Downing Street view that? Because, I mean, whatever you think of Elon Musk, there's no denying he's one of the world's most powerful men.
Yeah, he is. And actually, I was trying to think, it feels quite unprecedented to have such an influential figure on the global stage making these comments about the UK and a direct attack on the new UK Prime Minister. I was actually trying to think of a parallel to this week. And the only thing I can think of is actually when Donald Trump, in his first term in the White House, when he was going after Sadiq Khan for some of the knife crime that we saw in London, and there was that very public spat between the two of them. However, while Sadiq Khan saw political utility in going back against Trump and waging that in public because it played well in London, Keir Starmer and Number 10's view is very much to try and deprive Musk of oxygen. They basically do not want a public spat with a man with that amount of influence and that amount of visibility. I mean, everything that Elon Musk says and tweets is viewed by tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people around the world. So their view is basically, we just need to try and ignore Musk and his rhetoric. And in fact, one person close to the Prime Minister described it to me this week as being a bit like when you're in a pub and someone spills your pint. You can either push back and start a brawl, or you can decide to just go with the flow and enjoy your evening. And that's kind of the mantra that they're adopting.
The thing is, if you follow that analogy, Elon Musk is a massive bloke. He would be the big burly bloke with the tattoos down his sleeve. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. He's not.
Well, that's the point, isn't it?
To take on.
Even though they've kind of ignored the pint being spilt over, I think Musk is still gearing up for a fight. So
yeah,
and there is a serious reason for this. I think if we kind of try and understand what's going on in the mind of Elon Musk, I think what he is obviously comes from the kind of ultra liberal conservative thinking in America, right? And there's what's happening in this country is we're obviously introducing a major piece of legislation called the Online Safety Act. Now, that is intended to crack down on some of the stuff that we have seen in the last fortnight, the rampant disinformation online, which sparked the Southport riot to begin with, and then everything that came from that. But that also places some very stringent obligations on social media publishers, people like Elon Musk. And he is clearly unhappy about that. And what's interesting is longer term, when this act starts to bite, because it's not due to come into force until the end of the year, what will be interesting to see is whether Elon Musk and his company, X, actually abide by the regulations. And what could that actually mean for the platform, Twitter/X, in this country if it doesn't? Because the powers in this act are quite extensive. The government can fine Twitter/X up to 10% of its revenue. So it would be fascinating to see how that plays out longer term.
Let's touch on the Tory leadership race. Interesting that Priti Patel has been speaking to The Times today and has said that the perception of two-tier policing over the riots risks undermining public confidence. Quite interesting wording there, talking about the perception of it rather than suggesting it is an active policy. I mean, is this issue of immigration and the riots and how to respond to it and how the police approach it, is that going to be a big issue in the Tory leadership election?
I think so. It just depends if it peters out now, you see, because if the riots, this leadership contest is going to go on for months and months and months. But if, for example, this all peters out, the Tory leadership contest isn't going to really start in earnest till September when MPs come back to Parliament. But there's certainly the leadership candidates are definitely trying to show that they're capable of criticising and holding to Keir Starmer's government to account. And I think you can see that today in Priti Patel's interview in The Times. What I would say is I think you're right to highlight that she talks about the perception of two-tier policing, which if you read that carefully, that is not her saying there is two-tier policing.
Yeah.
She's basically trying, I think, to have her cake and eat it.
Because it would be, if she came out and said there is,
yeah,
not only would that be controversial in and of itself, but it would also, people would say, well, hang on a minute, you were the Home Secretary up until a couple of years ago, so therefore were you partly responsible for that being a policy?
Well, I think the reality is I don't think Priti Patel necessarily thinks there is two-tier policing. I think she's trying to be a little bit like Nigel Farage, who has suggested, and Musk, who have suggested there is. But what she is saying is the perception is the responsibility of the government. Yeah. It's for the government to show that there is no two-tier policing, whereas if she said there is, it's kind of an attack on both the government and the police chiefs, and she doesn't want that. I mean, she had quite a strong relationship as Home Secretary with the various police chiefs, and I don't think that's what she's after. She's just trying to kind of make a barb at Keir Starmer.
Just finally, tell us about the Chancellor's lavatory.
Okay, well, this is a very funny story that's been unraveling for a few weeks now. So, um, Rachel Reeves, as most people will know by now, is the first female Chancellor of the Exchequer. But she has discovered on entry to office that in her private office she has a lavatory, and the lavatory is kitted out with a urinal because obviously there's never been a female chancellor, so they've only ever needed the male dressings for a bathroom. Now, she has looked at and explored potentially modifying the bathroom to take out the urinal, but because the Treasury is a grand listed building, there are lots of planning constraints. And today we've learned that the cost of actually doing anything to remove this. Originally, they tried to look at removing the urinal, and then they were told, well, there's lots of problems with that because it's listed, so you'd need planning consent.
And why is the urinal listed?
That is a very good question. Unfortunately, I lack the planning expertise to answer that question sufficiently. But what I would,
If someone knows, if anyone knows, get in touch. If
I
you're
am
a planning
sure,
inspector.
I am sure there are lots of planning apparatchiks on Twitter who will answer that question. But so then she tried to cover it up, but that also is going to cost a fortune. It's going to cost £8,000. So for now, it looks like the Chancellor is stuck with her urinal.
There we go. Harry, great to chat. Thank you so much. And don't forget, you can read more from the Sunday Times Deputy Political Editor, Harry York, in the paper tomorrow or with a digital subscription via thetimes.com. And if you haven't downloaded it yet, why not try the Times app? It's a great way to join the conversation about all the big stories of the day. Tell us what you think in the comments section, of course, and you can share the stories that interest you the most. And you can use it wherever you are on your smartphone or tablet. So go to thetimes.com/subscriber to sign up.